This video is sponsored by World of Warships. Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. Prussia is probably the strangest nation to ever rise to the sheer level of prominence that it did in Europe. Through sheer force of will, a random German state managed to build itself up to such a point that it managed to not only challenge, but overtake the Habsburgs as the dominant force in Germany. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Prussia never rose? But first, if you like military, then boy do I have the game for you. World of Warships is a massive free-to-play online multiplayer PC game which pits teams of 12 against each other to battle it out for control of the seas. With over 40 unique maps to choose from, incredible graphics, realistic and dynamic weather, and hundreds upon hundreds of highly detailed versions of some of history's greatest ships to use, ranging from battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, or aircraft carriers, all from numerous different nations, World of Warships is easily one of the highest quality and most immersive naval war games out there. But, of course, that isn't all. New content is consistently being released every month, and new missions and events come out every single week. So, no matter whether you're a seasoned veteran or brand new, there's always something new to see and do in your quest to dominate the ocean. Oh, and by the way, the game is also available on console as well. So make sure to download World of Warships today with the link in the description, and in registration use promo code BRAVO to get a huge starter pack of 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days time of a premium account, and your very own ship. Good luck and happy sailing. And now, back to the video. So first, we're gonna need to take a look at how Prussia actually did rise to power. So, Prussia was first established in 1525 when, after converting to Protestantism, Albert von Hohenzollern, the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order, renounced his title and set up the Duchy of Prussia as a vassal state of Poland. And for a while, Prussia remained as an insignificant Polish vassal. In 1618, though, after Duke Albert Frederick of Prussia died without any male heirs, Prussia would end up coming into a personal union with the Electorate of Brandenburg, which was ruled by another branch of the House of Hohenzollern, ultimately creating the Union of Brandenburg-Prussia. But then, as a result of growing tensions between Protestants and Catholics within the Holy Roman Empire, the 30 Years' War happened. And if you know anything about the 30 Years' War, it would be that it completely devastated Germany, as Brandenburg-Prussia was ransacked by both Swedish and Imperial forces. The war completely crippled Brandenburg-Prussia, Brandenburg in particular, as, on average, about 50% of the population was killed. And in some areas, that was as high as 90%. As it took them around a century to recover. But it was this devastation and destruction that led the Elector, Frederick Wilhelm, also known as the Great Elector, to decide that the only way to protect his domain would be with the establishment of a standing army. And after the conclusion of the 30 Years' War, despite Prussia not really performing all that well, he was able to secure parts of Pomerania, which was split with Sweden, giving Brandenburg access to the Baltic Sea. They would then go on to use this to establish several colonies in Africa, but it didn't really go anywhere. But during the Northern Wars of the late 17th century, Frederick Wilhelm managed to secure Prussia's full sovereignty from Poland, which his successor, Frederick, would then use to establish the Kingdom of Prussia, with himself being named as King Frederick I. Frederick didn't really do much with the military, though, but his son, Frederick Wilhelm, yeah, that's not confusing at all, also known as the Soldier King, would really beef up the Prussian army. Under his rule, he would double the size of the army, training it like crazy, and dedicate a metric crap ton of the state budget to it, leading to the famous Voltaire quote, "Where most states have an army, the Prussian army has a state." And that army would be put to the test by Frederick Wilhelm's son, Frederick II, or Frederick the Great. German Salic succession law states that only men can rule as monarchs. However, the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor, Charles VI, didn't have any male heirs, and if he died without an heir, his realm would have completely collapsed, which would have spelled doom for the Habsburg monarchy. So, fearing this, he would end up issuing the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713, which would allow his daughter, Maria Theresa, to inherit the title of Archduchess of Austria. And then, in 1740, Charles died, still without a male heir, as Maria Theresa would end up inheriting the Austrian throne. But other German states, smelling blood in the water, saw this as an opportunity to challenge Habsburg dominance over Germany, with Bavaria, Saxony, and yes, Prussia, challenging her right to rule based on Salic law, ultimately starting the War of the Austrian Succession, with France wanting to challenge their Habsburg rivals, joining on the Prussian side, and Britain wanting to challenge their French rivals, joining the Austrians. As soon as war broke out, Frederick would invade Silesia, a rich region of northern Austria. And Frederick, an excellent strategist, managed to use the efficiency of the Prussian army to his advantage, securing the entirety of Silesia under Prussian control, with Prussia eventually signing peace with Austria. But after the Prussian victory, the war would ultimately end with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which saw things largely stay the same, with Maria Theresa being recognized as Archduchess, but being forced to make some small concessions, as well as losing Silesia to Prussia. And with Prussia's victory, they soon after emerged as a rising power in Europe and a German state capable of challenging the Habsburgs. But it was this rise to power that led to what was known as the Diplomatic Revolution, in which a series of alliances would be made in order to maintain the balance of power in Europe and prevent a war. Sounds familiar. Because of the concessions Austria had to make in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, at Britain's behest, they would end up abandoning Britain in favor of France, as well as Russia, who was worried about Prussia's ambitions on Polish land. And Britain, wanting a more powerful state in Germany as a check against French power, would end up forming an alliance with Prussia. Then, in 1754, fighting broke out between Britain and France in the Americas, which eventually spilled over into Europe, sparking the 7 Years' War. And despite having three great powers pressing down on Prussia, nearly destroying them, Frederick managed to pull through as both Britain and Prussia would come out on top. And it would be this victory that would cement Prussia's position as a great power in Europe that would eventually challenge Austrian dominance and unite Germany under its rule. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Frederick Wilhelm, that one, hadn't gone to the same levels that he did to bolster the Prussian military? After the death of Emperor Charles VI, it's still very likely that Frederick the Great would try to challenge Maria Theresa's succession, but in this timeline, despite Frederick's brilliant military strategy, without the improvements made to the Prussian army, they don't fare nearly as well as they did in our timeline. So, after the outbreak of the War of the Austrian Succession, Frederick still attempts to invade Silesia, but is then very quickly routed by the Austrians, who then push into Brandenburg, defeating the Prussians. And with Prussia defeated, Austria is then able to focus much more on other fronts, such as in Italy, the Low Countries, and other German states, managing to secure a complete victory in the war. With this victory, Austria is able to secure its dominance over Germany, likely annexing some parts of Bavaria and Saxony as well. And without having been bogged down by a long, exhausting war, Austria isn't forced to make the same concessions they did in our timeline, and without Prussia rising to power and taking Silesia, the diplomatic revolution never happens as the Anglo-Habsburg alliance remains in place. Meanwhile, fighting between Britain and France still breaks out in North America, which does still eventually spill over into Europe, with the 7 Years' War still breaking out. But this time, the war ends up being between Britain and Austria against France, as fighting once again spreads to the rest of Britain and France's colonies. In the end, the war still takes a heavy toll on both sides, but it's very likely that Britain still comes out on top, alongside Austria, as France still ends up losing nearly all of their colonies. But as both sides see heavy war debts, this still lays the seeds for coming revolutions. Over in America, discontent over high British taxes still boils over into revolt as the American Revolution breaks out in much the same way as in our timeline. However, without Prussia's militarization, Baron von Steuben wouldn't be there to train the American troops into a proper fighting army. So, as a result, the American troops don't perform nearly as well, as the British are very likely able to secure victory over the Americans, as leaders of the revolution are hanged. Back in Europe, discontent against the French monarchy would see revolutionary sentiment grow, but without the example of the United States, and with the failure of the American Revolution, this would take a lot of steam out of the French Revolution. And with Britain in a much more powerful position following victory in the American Revolution, they would probably be able to mount a successful offensive against revolutionary France, if the revolution even happens at all. As a result, France never goes on its rampage across Europe, as the sentiments of liberalism and nationalism never end up rising to the same level of prominence that they did in our timeline, as Italy never unites, and regions in the Balkans don't see the same level of resistance as they did in our world. And without Napoleon ruling over the entire continent, Europe doesn't see the destruction of the Napoleonic Wars, as the rest of the European empires remain much more powerful. So, the Spanish Empire manages to survive as other European powers continue to compete for dominance, as Austria and France compete for Italy and parts of Germany, Austria, France, and Russia compete over Poland, and Britain is forced to engage in continental affairs, with the Pax Britannica never happening. So, in the end, without Prussia upsetting the balance of power in Europe, the European empires continue the dance that they had been performing for hundreds of years, maintaining a steady balance among the great powers. Thanks again to World of Warships for sponsoring this video, and remember to download World of Warships and use promo code BRAVO for 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days of premium access, and your own ship. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. So that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.